Sounds good.
Well, hello. Let me welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm very excited for BioPhilly's living air conditioning, especially after the summer's heat. I live over in West Philly and it has just been scorching. I've been very happy the last few weeks as it cooled down. But nonetheless, I would love to fix this for next summer. I'm Bobby Safransky. I'm the events director here at Clean Air Council, and I'm excited to welcome you to one of many events at the 2020 virtual Greenfest Philly presented by Toyota Hybrids. If you're not familiar with Greenfest, it's the area's largest environmental festival, celebrating all things sustainable for the past 15 years. This year, the event is entirely virtual with live interactive programming, just like today, scheduled through this Sunday, the 27th. You can see a full list of the events we have scheduled at cleanair.org/greenfest. If you're not familiar with Clean Air Council, we are a member-supported organization working to protect everyone's right to a healthy environment. We have over 8,000 members who bring their passion in the fight for better environmental health protections and are key to our ongoing work to protecting public health and ecosystems. But we need more members, so we need you to take actions on alerts that we send out, to give us feedback on our programs, and to spread our work through social media. We're going to save questions for the end, but if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to add them to the chat, and we will keep track of them and address them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I will stop talking and kick it over to BioPhilly. Again, I'm very excited for this presentation, as I know all of you are. So please take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're grateful you're spending time with us this afternoon. My name is Melanie, and I'm joined with my fellow BioPhilly members, Freda, Helena, Vera, and Sadie. And BioPhilly is a nonprofit organization here in Philly. And what we are focused on is re-envisioning Philadelphia as a resilient, biodiverse wild habitat. So we use a combination of public workshops for grassroots engagement and data-driven policy to raise awareness and really advocate for the important link between human health and individual and public well-being and nature-based solutions. So last year we had our 5th annual conference here in Philly. It was focused on the urban heat islands and climate variability topic. We had 150 attendees join us from, and maybe some of you were there, but from different backgrounds and age groups and different professions: landscape architecture, design, public health, academia, city policy. And it was an incredible opportunity to get together, talk about projects currently being implemented within this space to address some of these issues, talk about some cutting edge ways we can really face these complex, multifaceted problems within our city landscape. Our 6th annual conference was scheduled for April. We do have to reschedule that. That will focus on Philadelphia's foodscape and the urban agriculture plan. But today, we're very excited to be talking to you about living air conditioning and carbon sponges and how biophilic solutions can help us beat the heat here in Philly, as well as other urban environments. So we look forward to your questions and to this conversation with all of you. Thanks again for being here. And without further ado, I will turn to Sadie to kind of kick us off. Sadie, can you talk to us about what an urban heat island is and the effect that it's having right now in our cityscapes?
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. Happy equinox, everyone, and thank you, Clean Air Council, for having us as part of your citywide Greenfest. There was a lot of work that was put into this. So before we talk about solutions, I'm usually the one brought up to properly frame the problem so we know what we're dealing with. So while hurricanes and flooding get a lot of attention in the media, Another consequence of our changing climate has been felt for years, particularly in our country's inner city neighborhoods, with an annual death toll that exceeds all other weather-related events combined. That's a stat from the CDC. So when we're talking about hurricanes or lightning or flooding, heat-related deaths surpass all of those combined. Death rates increase in cities with high seasonal variability. So places where you have really cold winters, you're more affected by really hot summers, longer heat waves, and high evening temperatures. And Philadelphia experiences all of these features. So I want to talk about what the urban heat island effect is. It happens when land and air temperatures are higher in urban areas due to an abundance of surfaces that absorb and radiate heat. So while climate change is real and we're all experiencing climate change, we're exacerbating it in some of our urban areas by how we design, build, and maintain our cities. So urban heat waves and urban heat islands is just starting to get the widespread attention it deserves. We're seeing it talked about more and more, especially in the last 2 years. And it's pretty serious. So urban areas heat up at roughly twice the rate of non-urban areas. This graphic is from the Nature Conservancy. It's oversimplified, but I wanted to show it because it shows you the basic function of how a landscape affects heat absorption. And what this doesn't show is the large degree of the variability amongst cities and even amongst neighborhoods within the same city. So can I go to the next slide, please? For instance, in 2019, just last year, the Philly's Office of Sustainability with Philly's Public Health Department developed an open access heat vulnerability index. If you go online and just Google Philadelphia Heat Vulnerability Index, you'll be able to find it. And it documents land temperatures across neighborhoods to properly ascertain the neighborhoods or hot spots in the city. And they cross-reference that with health data to ascertain Philly's most vulnerable neighborhoods. So who are the people with pre-existing conditions that already are the most vulnerable to extreme heat? And the city has found that a lot of these people are already living in some of the city's hottest neighborhoods. So it's open access. You can go on and click around. You can look up your neighborhood. They have some layers of data already there, like tree canopy. I've been bothering them a little more to add more data, like crime stats. I think it's good to put these all on a map to see, or you can take a glance at a map and see really complicated relationships really easily. So this map not only demarcates priority areas in which the city can concentrate its heat mitigation efforts, but it also provides a tool for public outreach and engagements. You can access this map to learn about your neighborhood and how it compares to others in the city. Some parts in Philadelphia can be as many as 22 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than other neighborhoods. I'm going to pause there and let that sink in. 22 degrees is an immense difference. It's more of a difference than in most other cities that are getting heat mapped and heat modeled right now. City of Portland, for instance, saw a 13-degree difference between neighborhoods. So that's an immense difference. The areas in blue and purple are the coolest places in the city, and a lot of these you see are located along waterways. Like something like a waterway would make a big difference. But the biggest difference you see across neighborhoods is on the next slide, is urban forest and tree canopy distribution. So although the city has a whole as around 18% to 20% tree canopy coverage, it is not distributed evenly. Some areas like parks, like the Wissahickon, has an 80% canopy cover. My neighborhood of Mount Airy has about a 50% tree canopy cover, but many of the poorest neighborhoods, like Callow Hill and Hunting Park, have 5 or 8 or 10% tree canopy cover. Chinatown has a 3% tree canopy cover. So I put this up. The map is for zip codes to give you an idea. It's a rough look to, you know, compare that to the heat vulnerability index to see where the hot spots are. Now that's city level. So the next slide, and I love this graphic, and although this is Baltimore, it shows how heat islands work on a street level. I just went from, you know, city level to now street. It's how people experience heat on the ground. So this is Baltimore, but we have many, many streets in Philly that look exactly like this. These are real surface temperatures taken on a single day in July of last year. And it shows you just what a difference one street tree can make. Some homes without street trees and with black roofs actually have higher temperatures inside the homes than outside. Heat analysis like these, looking at street level ambient or surface temperatures, have only really started being done in the last couple of years. And there's a group out of Portland State University that's doing the majority of them for all the cities. Like DC just got theirs done. Baltimore was done at the same time. This was just last year. So you see as a difference between 84 degrees on the sidewalk right below a street tree versus 117.6 degrees just 20 feet down without a street tree. And look at the car. I mean, metal, you see a difference, like different surfaces make. It's the car is literally turning into an oven. So previously heat mapping was done with satellite imaging, being done from space. So you can imagine it's not as specific, as precise as this when people are literally biking or driving down the street, taking ambient air or surface temperatures in real time. So because humans can only thrive in a really narrow range of temperatures, even a change of a couple of degrees in either direction can have vast consequences for human health. While local heat mapping and modeling efforts have demonstrated that merely providing more shade can significantly reduce heat-related mortalities, larger scope climate models predict an increase in the frequency, severity, and duration of heat waves in the coming decades. Can I have the next slide? So while our city is heating up, we are continually losing mature tree canopy to age, disease, and development. So this is the city's most recent tree canopy assessment from 2019. I have it here, you can Google it. Shows that the city lost an equivalent more of 1,000 football fields of tree canopy in the last 10 years. Many of these losses occurred in residential property. So Tree Philly, a program of Philly's Parks and Rec, almost completely concentrates on tree giveaways that support private residents to plant on their private land. So with a citywide goal for 30% tree canopy coverage in every neighborhood by 2025, that's in 5 years, that's a lot to make up for. Philly currently has 69 tree species. It's a relatively low biodiversity. A city like DC, for instance, has about 130 tree species that they're dealing with. So increased diversity usually means increased resiliency. And DC, for instance, are constantly testing new species for robustness to pests and climate changeability. And DC plants about 8,000 new trees a year, every year. And what they do is they continue to make new space for trees. We feel like we don't have a lot of space for trees, but we actually have plenty. We just have to make space for them. What they do is they cut into sidewalks a lot and then make tree trenches throughout the entire block instead of like individual tree pits. So spaces that are normally overlooked, like right-of-ways, like entrances onto highways, they make use of like every surface. So currently Parks and Rec has launched its first ever urban forest management planning process, something that BioPhilly has strongly suggested they do for a few years. They sum it up like this, quote, In support of citywide equity and sustainability goals, the plan will establish a 10-year strategy to grow, protect, and care for Philadelphia's tree canopy and set forth new ways of working with residents to combat climate change. The plan will provide recommendations to the city and its partners on how best to coordinate and strengthen their work on tree planting and maintenance, and what role policy can play to support a more tree-friendly culture across the city, unquote. So the request for consultants has gone out. The deadline was right when COVID hit. I see that BioPhilly's hiring a lot of new people, so I presume that they're moving forward with this process, but this is really something to keep an eye on. There's supposed to be a huge public outreach element about what you can do to influence the strategic management plan and how to help the plan and its implementation. So in the past 10 years, increasing evidence has supported the assertion that trees benefit human mental and physical well-being in myriad ways. So people just feel better about themselves and their communities when hanging out in green spaces. And what we say in BioPhilly is that you have to really understand it, you have to experience it. We can sit here talking about it until the end of time, but until you experience it, you don't really understand it. So as urban populations continue to swell, trees and natural areas can no longer be viewed as a luxury. Urban beauty and the havens that urban trees provide must be like an integral part of the priorities of the city moving forward. And it's a core strategy for improving public health and well-being, an essential component for livable communities. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Helena, who's going to be talking about more solutions.
Thank you, Sadie. Yes, so at BioPhilly, we have 3 of us are architects, so we are trained to design places of shelter. And in major heat events, buildings actually become perilous. As Sadie just pointed out, sometimes the indoor temperatures are higher than even higher than the outdoor temperatures. And as Sadie also pointed out, the effects of climate change on the body are vast and very problematic. We literally do not have the biological ability to adapt to rising temperatures. Somebody calculated that it would take us 1.8 million years to evolve to 1 degree Celsius temperature increase, and we're already, beyond that. So we literally cannot manage to solve this problem by evolving into adaptation. We've tried to solve this problem by turning up the air conditioning to make ourselves comfortable, which is a natural impulse, but of course air conditioning adds more heat to the environment in addition to emissions and also noise. So to meet the 2 degree Celsius target of the Paris Accord, studies have shown that just reducing building operational carbon footprint by upgrading thermal envelopes and energy systems is not enough. We have to capture and store carbon. It's equally as important, if not more important. And it turns out that there are experts out there that know how to do this, carbon sequestration experts, and who can help us capture and store carbon and cool our buildings at the same time in our neighborhoods. And these experts, of course, are trees and plants. They have perfected this technique and this skill over eons. And we can think of this as living air conditioning, where plants, in fact, are the design language of buildings and of cities, the facade language of buildings. And where buildings become carbon sponges that are wrapped in sort of leafy envelopes. I call them ecotonal envelopes that absorb carbon, cool our city, become happy habitats to support our own well-being and that of our neighbors, all at the same time. And when I say neighbors, I mean not just human neighbors, but everybody who's an urban resident, from small mammals to birds to pollinators and so forth. Because we know that from research that it is clear that our own contact with biodiverse nature in cities as well is physiological beneficial to us. We know this intuitively already because we choose nature as our vacation destinations. And the more biodiverse places are, the more physiologically restorative they are for us. Leafy building envelopes encourage our connection to seasons and weather, and they bring joy up close and personal in the form of encounters with birds' nests and pollinators and small mammals. So in alignment with the Global Half Earth Project spearheaded by the E.O. Wilson Foundation, some cities, this one is San Francisco, have already officially established biodiversity policies that permit each home owner to become part of the solution. 1 yard and 1 planted rooftop, 1 vegetated facade at a time. We can all become part of the solution or part of the green urban tapestry. And I know Vera will speak about this more in detail later, but thinking of this essentially as a leafy green blanket that can insulate our city from extreme weather conditions such as extreme heat. And much as an architect, I think of buildings having specific envelopes and edges, and a lot of our buildings have very hard edges. They're made of steel, of reflective glass and concrete. And by contrast, our bodies and those of all biological organisms are soft. And so softening our cities to better suit our own biology and that of our neighbors serves our health and well-being. And we need to think of planted roofs as high meadows that are subject to different wind and drought conditions as meadows on the ground, for example. So we need to think of them as plant communities that shelter and support one another. And we need to plant them and feed them accordingly. Here are a few examples of inner city high meadows, including gardens that grow food and support beehives on top of roofs, etc. So I like to think of buildings as mountains or vertical forests. And we know that birds think of our buildings in the same way because they hunt from them as though they were mountains. They nest on them. And they often die trying to survive in and around our buildings because our buildings, being of mirror glass, have become very serious bird killers, especially if they're illuminated at night. So to soften buildings and cities and sequester carbon and cool our cities, plants and trees provide the natural answer for all of the above. Here are just a few more examples of what that could look like. So the mechanism through which this happens, of course, is evaporative cooling, where plants take water in through the roots and transpire it through their leaves. And walls and surfaces, as Sadie already pointed out, shaded by vegetation can be dramatically cooler compared to unvegetated surfaces. In terms of facades, there is an airspace that's created, a sort of intermediate zone that moderates between indoor and outdoor temperatures. And it can also be extremely beautiful. As these examples show, I think of them as blooming facades. You know, it can be a modern design, contemporary design, or a more traditional design. It can be retrofitted to existing buildings. But weaving a blooming tapestry that we can design for, you know, however we would like it to be, whatever the wind and climatic and temperature conditions are, we can create leafy curtains to shade areas, or these kind of systems that you see here, like green screen, for example, stainless steel wire mesh or stainless steel screens. They can even be freestanding. There are many different companies that provide that kind of option, and there's a great deal of variety on how we can begin to just vegetate our buildings creatively and design these sort of intermediate layers. Whenever we build birds close up to our buildings, we have to think about birds. Birds and glass do not match very well. And we currently kill 1 billion birds a year in North America with our buildings. And a lot of them die on residential buildings. So just a detail here, leaving your screens up in the wintertime saves a lot of birds, especially if you have bird feeders nearby. Also applying visible patterns to your windows. Birds tend to not fly through anything that's narrower than 2 inches. So there are stripe and polka dot patterns. The American Bird Conservancy and Audubon have design guidelines for buildings that you could look into if you're concerned about particular windows that tend to get hit by birds a lot. So the ultimate goal is to erase the distinction between the cool landscape and the overheated city and wrap the entire city in a leafy cooling blanket or tapestry. And there are various new designs on the board on how that might look. Literally, this house literally grows its own food on top of its own roof as a prototype. Another way to cool your buildings is to think about where summer breezes are coming from and then plant vegetation, trees or green screens, planted screens to literally channel that breeze into your building rather than have it pass you by. So you can kind of redirect the cooling breezes to flow through your building rather than past them. And of course, we need to mention water. If we talk about living air conditioning, adding to plants evapotranspiration water, especially in the time of COVID, it behooves us to meet outdoors, and leafy outdoor urban living rooms are part of the civic lifeblood, especially right now. Flowing water delivers important negative air ions, which we know from research slow viral spread, and they also lift our spirits. Individually and collectively, which is why we like to vacation near bodies of water, for example. So I'm going to now pass this on to Freda.
And before we do that, I just want to say thanks, Bill, for that comment. He's a shade tree commissioner in a small New Jersey community. And he said most of his budget is spent on maintenance and pruning removals, and said that if the need is greatest in low to mid-income neighborhoods, maybe like a natural job training program.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Okay.
We have your quote from E.O. Wilson. Do you want to go back one? So we have to read that. There can be no purpose more inspiring than to begin the age of restoration, reweaving the wondrous diversity of life that still surrounds us. E.O. Wilson is, of course, one of the experts. We all appreciate his input. Next. So now we have some ideas of how we can do some cooling, but getting down to the ground and closer to home here. We all, I think, live in Philly, and what the city has been trying to do and what we are all trying to do is important to our own personal environment that we currently live in. Next slide. So we have a number of examples of green roofs. The current vision here is the Sierra Center, which I hope many of you are familiar with, and courtesy of Roof Light. Sierra Center is one of our larger green roofs, and at these challenging times provides an outdoor space for many activities. If you're not aware of that, you can look up their site, and they have, I think, a movie on Wednesday night, and then they have an exercise class Saturday at 10 p.m. So next slide. I've done a lot of work with the city of Philadelphia for quite a few years, and one of the biggest challenges to providing these kind of solutions is actually getting the project done. So being green isn't easy. I was assigned to fix 6 leaking library roofs a number of years ago and prioritize them. I visited the Logan Circle Main Branch Library, which you see here, and it was leaking up in the top center piece over the rare books room, and it was covered in ballast. So I looked at that and I said to myself, well, this is certainly a priority roof to stop leaking, but because of the pile of ballast centered above the rare books room, it became apparent to me that it probably had structural load capacity to add a green roof. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. So here's a image of the roof without all the ballast a year later in the planting. So just to give you a little of the background story. Challenge with the green roof scenario. I asked my supervisors at the time, and I had a lot of difficulty gaining support. So I wrote to Mayor Nutter at the time, suggesting that we do this project. And once he was elected, he decided that it was something worthwhile to pursue. The biggest challenge, as is in most projects, is the owners and operators, the facility managers, were very hesitant to entertain this new challenge. So I had to convince them that this was something that they could live with. And I did that by reaching out to Swarthmore College at the time and getting Peter Felipe to come as an expert to talk to them. And he explained how he had done this in Europe and he had done it many years. And slowly I could see the eyes brighten on the facilities people, and they were willing to entertain this as an idea. This is a picture on the southeast corner of the library roof. So I turned a space that was a ballasted leaking roof into a green oasis that the library has, since this time, now it's 12 years, maintained it well with an ongoing maintenance program, which is very important, but they've been able to afford that because it's a very well sought after space for events and weddings. And in these times, it could probably be used also as an outdoor classroom. Next slide. So in addition to the library, we have many residential projects in Philadelphia. Thin Flats, Hope Street, which is the Northern Liberties, Bancroft Green, and the Friends Center, which is not a residential project, but it's a very successful green roof. And that project is multifaceted with their geothermal system as well. Next slide. So we have also reached out to initiate projects. This project is in West Philly. It's in conjunction with One Art, who also is a partner with the Office of Sustainability. And I just want to say that all of our places are ecosystems that human beings help create, but the important part is that people and creatures, as Helen has mentioned, we're all part of this. So every effort that we make can improve our environment. Vera?
So when I first spoke to Malika at One Art in West Philadelphia, she mentioned the idea of planting an oasis, of letting the oasis come out from her property onto the street, which is what you're looking at. And what if instead of an oasis, it was just part of a larger tapestry? So next slide, please. Summers are hot, and they're getting hotter. And as my colleagues have explained, we can beat the heat by using nature as our ally. Let me take this one step further. In his latest book, Nature's Best Hope, Dr. Doug Tallamy, a professor of entomology and wildlife ecology at the University of Delaware, resists the idea that conservation of nature should happen only in parks and designated areas. He proposes homegrown national park. His idea is that if half of the privately held land in the country were converted to a functional ecosystem, one that supports biodiversity, we could create a park measuring something like 20 million acres. To put it in perspective, that is bigger than many of the great national parks put together, including the likes of Yosemite, Grand Canyon, and Denali. And way bigger than our Fairmount Park, the largest urban park in the country, clocking in at 4,100 acres. The entire Fairmount Park system, which consists of 63 parks, is about 9,200 acres. So think about it, 20 million acres. In the other book that I'm showing, Bringing Nature Home, Dr. Tallamy explains that it's not just planting, it's what you plant that is important. Plant to support life. Native plants and trees have co-evolved with native insects, which in turn feed other species, including us. Pollinators, as we know, are required for reproduction of 80% of our plants, including most of the food that we eat. But caterpillars, as it turns out, are just as important and quite vital for bird life. Did you know that caterpillars are the mainstay of baby birds' diets? A single clutch of chickadees can consume 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars before maturity. So back to native plants. Oaks, for example, are a great choice. They not only are a great shade tree, they can support over 500 species of caterpillars, a true bird smorgasbord. And the truth is, we'll never even notice the caterpillars are there. I think the pandemic has made us more aware of the value of outdoor areas, whether it's our deck, our yard, our street, or a park. More aware of birdsong and the passing of season. The very idea that every yard, every tree, every wall, window, box, and container can contribute to cooling the city and promoting biodiversity is not only intriguing, but I think my colleagues would agree is necessary for our well-being. One of the goals at BioPhilly is to create a tapestry of green dots that spans from the Delaware to the Schuylkill. A tapestry, not an oasis here and there, but a tapestry. What if this tapestry were to join others and become a national tapestry, the Dr. Talmy's homegrown national park? So we urge you to help us create this tapestry and at the same time make Philly a cooler, more livable city for us human and for the rest of the creatures that we share it with. So what can you do? Next slide, please. Plant trees. I think we've beat that one over the head, but plant them on your property. Give them space, give them care. Request trees from the city. There are several programs that would help you with that. Join tree tenders to become more knowledgeable about the value of trees and how to care for them. Plant natives. Plant mostly natives in any case. Sometimes we want to plant other things, it's okay. But plant them as you would a neck tie or a necklace, as an ornament. Plant mostly native. Plant for pollinators and caterpillars. Do not spray for insects. We need them, and the baby birds need them. Advocate for increasing funding to parks for parks and recreation. According to the Trust for Public Land, while the U.S. average per capita spending for parks is $80, that's how much the city or state spends per person for parks. $80. Philly only spends $59, which is 10% less than what we spent in 2016. So let's get together and encourage them. Let them know we care. So another thing is to network with your neighbors. Get trees, plant the garden, make it a game, make it a block party. So this slide, which you may take a screenshot, is a series of resources, some of which we have already mentioned. Tree Philly has a wonderful website and is part of Parks and Recreation, and they would be the ones who would give away trees for your yard or for your street. The Philadelphia Orchard Project plants trees, fruit trees, and they are active and work with community projects to plant fruit trees in the areas, and they help maintain them as well and teach people about them. The City of Philadelphia Trees and Parks and the Environment, that next website, is really the maintenance, the service part of the tree project. Philadelphia Horticultural Society tree tenders. That's where you can learn how to care for your trees. The City of Philadelphia Green Roof Tax Credit. There is a handsome tax credit if you are one of the homeowners who can afford to put a green roof on your house or business. Make sure you engage an engineer because you need to make sure that your roof has the capacity to hold it. Toxic Free Philly, which presented a very interesting chat today at noon, also with Clean Air Council, can explain all the reasons why you shouldn't be spraying and how we can plant without that. The Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources has wonderful lists with plants that will help in conservation and to promote biodiversity. Vibrant City Labs covers urban forestry, and the Philadelphia Water Department joins with Philadelphia Horticultural Society with a rain check program, and they provide the homeowners with rain barrels for their properties. So let's do it.
That's a good segue into, we have some good questions and comments here. And Carl, thanks for your question. He says, I know about the Philly Street Tree Program. Are there grants or affordable ways to help homeowners install green walls or a green roof affordably? And that might be a question for the architects, but do we know of, I mean, we know of green screen, which Helena, you showed an example of.
Yeah, but he's asking about grants. Yeah.
It depends on what kind of house you have. I have a green wall in my house. It's a volunteer Virginia creeper that just decided to grow up on the side of my house, and I let it. As opposed to English ivy, which can destroy your mortar, native Virginia creeper actually does not, and it's actually like a host plant for things like sphinx moss. Green roofs. Last time I did research for the Philly Water Department, they were looking into green roof grant funding. At the time, green roofs were only affordable, feasible if you had like 5,000 square feet or more. So they were looking at programs that took like an entire block of row homes and combining them and doing it in one. Green roofs are mostly done in Chicago, places like Chicago, to mitigate urban heat island effects. In Philly, we normally do green roofs for stormwater because a lot of things in Philly revolve around stormwater. I don't know if any grants have become available because green roofs, especially green meadows, ones that have evolved beyond just planting really shallow succulents, but true green meadow roofs, I think became too complicated and expensive. I mean, Freda, do you know of any?
I just
don't
want
know of any grants, no. I just know of the city tax credit. And one of the biggest concerns, of course, is the structural capacity of your residential roof. So one would need to pay a structural engineer to do that analysis first, and then look at, there's intensive and extensive green roofs, and you would want the minimal one, which I think is extensive, which is, they can be as little as 2 inches deep, 2 to 6 inches. So I don't think that the costs are prohibitive if you already have the structural capacity.
Yeah, I want to add to that. We do have, I mean, it is a very well-known technology. You can buy the systems or you can install them in trays. Roof Meadow in Philadelphia is a company that has tremendous experience in doing that. In terms of the extensive roofs that Freda mentioned, the shallow ones, the sedum roofs in our excessive heat events have the tendency to dry out. And research shows that when they do dry out, they actually do not perform as well as a white reflective roof in terms of cooling the city. So it makes sense to install a roof that has more a vegetated roof that is more substantial and self-sustaining in heat environments. And if we plant them as plant communities, the plants will shade each other. So you will start with a sedum, and then you will grow a grass from the bed of sedum, a taller grass, which then will begin to shade the sedum. So the sedum doesn't dry out as quickly as it would all by itself. So we want to think of these roofs as living plant communities. And there's a lot of know-how, to support these kind of installation. Weight is the primary issue that we need to plan for in terms of engineering.
Bill brought up something that I know we've all talked about before, saying that he thinks that the greatest crop acreage is lawns. And if we converted a small portion of that to food or habitat, we could reestablish hedgerows in areas currently used for industrial agriculture.
That's what I'm talking about. So I'm one of the few people on my block that has a garden, has a perennial garden instead of a lawn, and I spend no money and very little work on it, whereas everyone around me is bringing in a diesel fueled lawn crew every week, spending a lot of time, money, and pollution for a lawn that most of the time they don't even use, where I'm like, I just have trees and shrubs and all the birds and insects are in my area, and I really, it's self-sustaining at a certain point. So I'm trying to put signs out and let people know, but it's a change of mentality.
It's also in terms of stormwater management, lawns are very ineffective. They're actually calculated as impervious surfaces pretty much.
They're treated as impervious surface, exactly.
They don't absorb much. So, you know, Philadelphia is also very concerned about stormwater and has done pretty well with that. But so, you know, thinking of it as something that absorbs stormwater, that cools the city, that supports wildlife, all of the above, you know, is accomplished by doing that. And I think there are some areas in the Philadelphia where you are mandated to keep your lawn areas at a certain height. Otherwise it's deemed untidy. So we need to kind of reevaluate our notions of, you know, manicuring landscapes and gardens and let things go more wild and let things go to seed. I see that in my own garden, that some of the plants that are now look a little bit dried up and, you know, I might want to cut them back. They are still food for goldfinches and so forth. They're out there hanging on those, you know, on those dry seeds, feeding. So yeah, it's a different understanding of landscape and nature, I think, different aesthetic.
One of the things that surprised the people doing heat modeling and heat mapping on a street level when they're going to different cities is that turf grass does not cool nearly as much as they thought like a green area would. It almost got almost as hot as the concrete. So like turf grass got in periods of stormwater, gets grouped in with impervious surface, turf grass also is getting pulled in with like a non-cooling land management strategy. So we don't recommend it.
Couple more questions here. Anna, just to answer yours, she asked if we all work all together or individually, and if collectively, what unites us as an organization. We do all do our individual work and have our own individual projects, but we come together as a Biophilly group to work with community projects like One Art. We've held conferences in the past here in Philadelphia, public workshops, and we're here to band together to unite and address all of these issues we've been talking about. Justine asked, what would you say are some of the best evergreen plant tree species that you might deem essential in a small garden or along a building wall? And then I'll combine that with Laura's, are there certain native trees that are better to plant that can also endure the lanternfly epidemic?
Nobody on our team is actually a landscape architect, I'm sorry to say. So I personally can't answer the evergreen question. I know, but maybe somebody else on our team can. But as far as the other trees, I have beehives, and one of the first things that bees need in the spring are blooming trees. So trees that bloom in the spring that bloom early in the spring, as early as possible, are wonderful. And oaks in general are great food trees, as Vera mentioned, lindens, and you know, any kind of native tree that also wild bees would be looking for early on after they're coming out of the winter.
Can I add to that?
The book that you recommended has all the answers.
Right, but if I may add to that, the one of the sites that we list has information about all the native plants that you can use.
Yeah.
Their tolerance to an urban environment is something else. Like if they were on a street and where they're subjected to salts and things like that, that I can't help with. But they have usually very good lists, and they're divided. The listings are divided into shade and sun plants, and also by kinds of soil. So you might check that out. In terms of the lanternfly, do not plant tree of heaven. Penn State University has quite a bit of information regarding the lanternfly and what the tree of heaven looks like. And they say to avoid also trees that look like the tree of heaven, such as the black walnut, which I have one of.
Maples.
And the lanternflies love it.
Maples have been affected a lot by lanternflies.
So the thing with lanternflies is that they only really kill tree of heavens. They will affect other, unless you have a baby tree, they will affect other trees like maples and willows. I have a curly willow outside. They love that willow. They will live on it and hang out on it, but they won't actually kill the willow. So lanternflies don't affect conifers. The thing is, we don't have that many native conifers to Pennsylvania. It's like red cedar and hemlock, and you can't really plant hemlocks anymore because they're really, they can't deal with the changing climate, and the Willia delegate is about to take it out. So as opposed for evergreens, again, we don't have a lot of native evergreens here. I have yews. I really like yews. There's a deciduous conifer called a dawn redwood that could be native. It's 200 million years old, and the continents were in different areas when it developed. So is it native? I would argue probably yes, but it's still pretty okay to plant maples. I would just, go to a plant sale like at Bartram's Garden, which they have kind of different tree species available. I got a yellowwood there that is hard to find, and I think that's a lovely tree, and you can talk to them about it. So check out the local native plant sales.
Our cherry, I don't know if cherry laurels are native, but they are extremely hardy in heat environments. They also provide good pollinator food. It's a bush, it's not a tree, but it's a tall bush. So the lady was asking about along a wall in maybe an urban garden. They have good pollinator value. They also have berries. They look like little green cherries or like little mini olives that the birds really enjoy. And the deer don't like them. In case you have deer where you are, deer will not touch them.
What's really wonderful, another resource, is this is part of the Forest Service. It's the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And it shows you like they'll tell you which tree species are really vulnerable to climate change and are on the way out. So we say plant natives. Some natives, Doug Tallamy doesn't always touch upon the idea that we have a changing climate, and like we can't plant our state tree as a hemlock. You can't really plant them anymore. Our state shrub is a mountain laurel. Those are all dying. So just keep that in mind when they have spreadsheets of what tree species are the most vulnerable to climate change, which are the least, and you can cross-reference them and maybe find something that you don't usually have. So check it out. It's forestadaptation.org. It's an amazing resource.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. And thanks for joining us tonight. And feel free to get in contact with us. Again, our website is biophilly.org. And I will pass it back off to you, Bobby.
Thank you, everyone. That was so great. I learned a lot, and I'm very excited to look at some of those resources. As you know, I've talked to you before about wanting to cool my West Philly home and deal with our narrow, treeless street. So I'm very excited to try to step up our game. And I'm curious if the things that are creeping up the back of my house is actually a Virginia creeper. So I made sure to note that so I can look into it to see whether or not I should kill them to save my masonry, or kind of support them to keep cooling my house.
So for the record, my house is covered in English ivy. I have a stucco house that's covered in English ivy, and it hasn't destroyed the walls yet. It's been that way for 20 years. And it's full of birds' nests, so it does cool the house quite nicely.
Yeah, just don't pull it off.
Don't pull it off.
Yeah.
You just trim it. You give it a crop haircut.
It'll take off with it.
It's wonderful.
Can I add something, Bobby? If you don't know what it is, go to iNaturalist.
Yes.
Download the app.
Absolutely.
iNaturalist will help you identify it. I've identified a few things like that. And by the way, there is a City Nature Challenge that's having a BioBlitz this coming Friday.
Yes.
So you can observe. You can see that on our website as well. It's on our schedule. So just wanted to give that a shout out.
And Bobby, we had one last question. Can you remind, Lynn asked, will it be possible to see the recording somewhere online? And that will be provided by Clean Air Council, right?
Yep, absolutely. If you just go to cleanair.org/Greenfest, you will see an option for our recap of the event, and that will have links to all the videos.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Just want to say we hope to have a conference next April, fingers crossed, supported by Jefferson, as our conferences are.
Even if we have to have it outdoors, right?
Yeah, yes.
We'll figure it out.
There.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you, Bobby.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.